To Live at Five. I am Alexis Dennehy and I have with me Dr. Rachel Hannam. How are you, Rachel?
I'm doing very well, thanks, Alexis. How are you?
I'm well, and as always, very happy to have a new topic to be sinking our teeth into the topic of sensitivity,
Hmm.
which we imagine that many of our listeners will relate to, and those of us that are drawn to therapy or community groups tend to be high on the sensitivity scale. And especially with the increased diagnoses of neurological conditions, Rachel and I thought this would be a good topic given that if you do experience a nervous condition, chances are you relate to at least some of the qualities of being a sensitive person. So Rachel's going to tell us a little bit about where the highly sensitive person comes from, how you can check your sensitivity, and then talk to us about an NVC approach, because after all, it is sensitivity that helps us to connect through our feelings to our needs as well as our values and ultimately our longings. So I'm also going to share a little bit about my perspective from naturopathic principles of homeostasis, and we'll give you guys some time to bring us your questions. So please jot them down for yourself or put them in the comments, and we will definitely be attending to those about halfway along. So,
Fantastic.
Rachel, please let us know. Tell us a bit more about the highly sensitive person.
Mm. Well, this topic came up in a few conversations in my practice this week, including a woman who wrote to me and said, I found your video from a few years ago on Facebook about highly sensitive people, and I think that I might be one, and I think my son might be as well. And so I thought, let's dive into this topic of being a highly sensitive person and sensitivity. Um, because as a therapist, I come across people who I would consider highly sensitive. They consider themselves highly sensitive. And I want to start off by talking about the strengths and the benefits. Let's start with the positive here,
Good idea. Let's
because
do that.
I know there's a lot of challenges for people who are very sensitive to their own biochemistry or sensory input from the outside world. But let's talk about what's good about it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, as I see the benefits and strengths of being highly sensitive is that these people tend to be in their own way quite conscientious because they're tuned into other people's feelings and needs, and they tend to be empathic, and they might notice subtle details in their environment and interactions. So this means they not always, but they may often have good social skills, picking up on nonverbal kind of body language and other subtle cues. They may be high on empathy. They can kind of get a read on other people's emotions. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and they're sensitive to their environment. So they can kind of be sensitive to the environmental effects on other people as well, but it could make them, a little hypersensitive or even neurotic to detecting threat and danger, which, is a survival mechanism. Like any survival mechanism, if it goes a bit haywire, then it can cause us some challenges. But there's all these beautiful strengths about being
Mm-hmm.
a sensitive human being who can be so aware of all these different stimuli.
Yes, which brings me, I'm remembering to share my shirt with you because I thought it was relevant for today. I'm not sure if it's going to come out the right way or back to front, but it
No,
says,
it's the right way.
oh, great. So it's stay true to yourself, which I thought was perfect. Knowing that those of us, or those of you watching, are probably going to be sensitive to the visuals, but also because there are absolutely strengths. And in my prep for this, I was connecting within myself to and reading also about the quality of feeling isolated, or even being told you're too sensitive, or you don't fit in, or you're overreacting. Why do you make things so complex? And I think those of us that do relate as being sensitive, if we persist with it, it does force us. Well, if it encourages us to find language to share our experiences, and ultimately has the potential to lead to a different kind of intelligence, I would say. It's a sensory kind of intelligence.
That's a beautiful way of saying it. There's an intelligence to
Yeah.
the sensitivity. The body has its own intelligence if we know how to respect and use it.
Mm.
Yeah. I want to kind of point out that high levels of sensitivity, this is not a diagnosis in and of itself. So that's important to point out. But high levels of sensitivity to internal and external stimuli does tend to go, as you've mentioned, very often with neurodivergence. So very often people who've been diagnosed with or suspect they have ADHD, ASD, autism, or sensory processing disorder or difficulties, those folk will very often be highly sensitive.
Mm.
And, I'm very open about the fact that 2 of my 3 children are neurodivergent. And I've got a beautiful story about my oldest daughter. When she was about 9, she had a lollipop with a picture of a bee on it. And she got very attached to this bee lollipop and the artwork of this bumblebee. And I think it got destroyed or messed up somehow. And she was devastated, and she
Oh,
cried about this bee lollipop that was, had to go in the bin.
oh.
And because I'm not quite that sensitive, although I am a bit sensitive, I just didn't understand why she'd become so attached. And years later, she told me that, she always had such an affinity for bees, and she'd always look for bees in the garden and when we were out. And she
Mm.
just had this real tenderness, this real kind of love at this really kind of organismic level
Mm.
for bees and many other animals. And so this represented, a dying bee. And it stuck in my mind as such a poignant example of her sensitivity. Whereas her brother might have, who is also sensitive in his own ways, but not like that. He might have just thrown it in the bin once it got ruined and
Mm.
not thought about it.
Mm.
So there are these ways in which highly sensitive people can sort of come across as a bit quirky, a bit weird. And a lot of the quirky, arty, weird people in the world are also beautifully sensitive and maybe see the world quite differently. And to quote Tony Attwood, this is not a disability. This is just a different ability.
Yeah, yes. I am intrigued to ask you, Rachel, how sensitivity lives in you. How do you recognize it? How does it play out in your life? I
Yeah,
imagine your work, particularly, that you would be calling on your bodily awareness uh, for empathy. Um, yeah, and also tapping into different parts of yourself. I don't know. How is it a strength for you?
that's such a great question. And thank you for asking, because it's a reflection I've not done for a long time. Um,
Hmm.
but it's one, as a supervisor to other therapists, I do get asked, and clients sometimes ask, how do you not take too much on board? How do you be empathic without drowning in, other people's kind of distress and trauma? And so there is a need to kind of try to regulate, manage, titrate, our own openness and receptivity, because sensitivity is about receptivity. And then sometimes cocooning, sometimes sort of doing what we need to do to kind of manage or even close down some of that ability, just so that we can, it's that impulse some people get to go into a darkened room with with no sound, just to get some relief from stimulation. We all have our threshold
Mm,
for
mm,
sensory and emotional inputs.
mm,
And so I talk to therapists about practices for managing their own kind of compassion fatigue. It's not quite what I'm looking for. But,
mm,
I definitely have been deeply moved by clients' stories and friends' pain.
mm,
And like most people, I'm affected by other people's moods, because emotions are contagious.
mm,
And in answering your question, I'm looking at a little checklist that I'll put in the comments afterwards, that everyone can go through and get their score on Elaine Aron's highly sensitive person checklist. And I answered that I'm also sensitive to caffeine,
mm,
and I am deeply moved by art and music. So and I can't watch violent movies. I'm a bit of a Debbie Downer when my friends or partner want to see violent movies because I'm very sensitive to
Mm.
depictions of violence. So
Mm.
these are some of the ways sensitivity lives in me, and I definitely notice it as an elevated heart rate and
Mm.
sort of tension and tightness in my body.
Mm.
And so, I will, I'm like you, I'm very body based, and I will kind of want to move that through,
Mm.
breathe with that, and be very discerning about
Mm.
the sensory input that I allow to keep coming
Mm.
in, right?
Yes, that word discerning really lands for me, and almost that need for protection, um, which, let's face it, we are living in quite unnatural and synthetic climate on so many levels. So there is that need to withdraw the senses. In fact, it's one of the 8 limbs of yoga is sensory withdrawal,
Mm.
and definitely Iyengar talks about 1 in every 4 weeks being restorative yin practice,
Mm.
which I think is particularly important in today's day and age. Yeah. So it's interesting that you talk about that. That not taking it on is an interesting topic in itself, because there's something also quite pure and cleansing, I find, and even energizing about empathy. I don't
Mm.
I don't find I feel drained. I mean, it might be different if I was, really cranking long days, 6 days a week. But it probably helps that we do a lot of movement and breath work here, which, like you say, kind of moves it through,
Yeah.
and it allows almost quite an intense experience of sensation, which I agree. Sensitivity lives, well, for me, it's mostly in my skin, actually.
Yes.
Yeah, which is gorgeous. It's glorious. I mean, it's a heightened experience if, as
Mm.
you say, I can regulate it.
Mm. Yeah. And so when I work with clients who actually, like really struggle with this, like there's everything's on a continuum, right? And you and I might be moderately sensitive in certain ways.
Mm.
I'm probably highly sensitive in a few ways, but otherwise I'm with you. Mostly kind of experiencing empathy and compassion invigorates me
Mm.
mostly, although I know because my job's more stationary than yours, sitting and listening and
Mm.
talking, if I do 7 or 8 clients in a day,
Mm.
I feel like the stories, the emotions that kind of wash through my system, it kind of does take it out of me. But if I only have 4 or 5, I notice it's so much more. My capacity is, I can have enough capacity for that. So I've over 11 years, I've tracked my own capacity for emotional and sensory stimuli and input into my system. And we're all different. Some people can take more, some people can take less.
Mm.
And the reality is some people will need to buy noise cancelling headphones, although we have to be careful because we can sensitize us if we remove ourselves too much from sensory input. If we stay out of noisy crowds, if we wear the noise cancelling earphones, if we detach too much from the sensory world, and this does happen. I have had clients and with my own daughter who's gone a bit too far with blocking out sensory inputs. It actually
Yeah,
sensitizes the nervous system, and then we become less resilient to stressful situations.
yeah, yes.
So we
We all
do need to
know
be
a few of
careful.
those, and we've probably all been there at times. Um, when there is, yeah, we do just want to shut down. I mean, I am
Yes.
quite sure that the majority of stress is caused by an inability to detach, distance, withdraw from stimulation.
Yeah.
Uh, I know a lot of
We all
people.
have our limits, don't we?
Yeah, that's right. And the majority of stress could be simply eased through that, let alone the flow and effect, to inflammation or chronic disease. But
Yeah.
I won't get on my high horse too much.
There's so many ways that we can be sensitized and sensitive to different internal stimuli, so our own body and our own neurochemistry, and then the external stimuli. And I'd be really interested to ask people who are listening if they'd be willing to share, no pressure, like in what realms are you sensitive? Are there certain external inputs or sensory stimuli that you're sensitive to, whether it's fabrics and clothing, whether it's sounds, whether it's light, whether it's noise, noisy, crowded places, or are there internal stimuli that you're very sensitive to, physical pain, certain, for some people, hunger. One of the questions on this questionnaire is, being hungry creates strong emotional reactions. I ticked yes for that one. I do get hungry.
I've seen you on retreat.
I'm very sensitive to my own biochemistry in that regard. And yet I'm not that sensitive to pain. Like, I have a fairly high pain threshold, but not a high hunger threshold. So I'd be really interested for people to share the ways in which they're sensitive or not, because I think this gives us an appreciation of difference. Like, just because I can handle ambulance and fire engine sirens going past my house, it sort of doesn't bother me that much. Although it's, I live near a main road, so it's gotten worse over the years. One of my kids finds it very distressing, and it's sort of like, oh, isn't that interesting how different we are? I can handle this thing, but not this thing. And, my son can watch very violent movies, but he's very sensitive to other people's emotions. And so I'm really fascinated. What are the ways in which that you are sensitive to internal and external inputs? So I'd
Yes,
love some
and
comment.
while we gather some feedback or some comments, I'm noticing how terrible my hair is. Sorry, distracted by a sensory input. um,
That's what happens.
I did want to share the naturopathic principle, which is so simple and basic, and
Yes.
it's basically that that we're looking to avoid swings, right? So
Yes.
yeah, and I think that this hypersensitivity is probably coupled also with a bit of a lack of sensitivity, and if we can just, the body itself is geared, every system, every cell is geared for homeostasis. So, an accurate sensory input, recognized and then responded to appropriately is a natural mechanism for maintaining balance and for avoiding highs and lows. I mean, when I was thinking about preparing for this, it occurred to me that, like an example of sensitivity is simply heat. Now, if I can have some sensory input and I can recognize that at the level of the brain and then respond through my motor output, my action, whether it's taking off my jumper, whether it's turning down the heating, then that is going to keep me going to keep my temperature within a certain range. Whereas if I'm disconnected, if I'm hyposensitive, then I'm unlikely to recognize that my body temperature is getting up. If I'm distracted, if my mind is ruminating, if I'm too engrossed in what I'm doing, yes, at the expense of my body, I'm going to, my thermostat's going to go up, and my body's going to have to kick in its own mechanisms, which are likely to be, breaking a sweat, shorter breathing, a faster heart rate, which then is going to lead to some swinging of homeostasis. So the right level of sensitivity is really about just being able to respond to my needs appropriately. So sensory input matching my motor input. I'm just starting to think of this as a mechanism for, bodily response, but even in relation to my environment, I'm not taking on too much, I'm not pushing myself out too much, and even in relation to my more energetic or emotional needs, which is, of course, the NBC approach. So I just wanted to share that because I think we've all got reactivity in some ways, as you've said. We've all got hypersensitivity in some ways, but there's always mechanisms, and in fact, the body itself has mechanisms. So I encourage you to use your sensation more accurately, just through observation and staying in contact to help stay in a more regulated space.
Yeah. And in psychology, we talk about, and in other disciplines, they talk about upregulating and downregulating to get back into some window of tolerance or some homeostasis, like you say, Alexis. So some, because this is my language and my world, I think, I really need to downregulate my nervous system right now. Or if I'm feeling a bit low motivation, I'm like, how can I upregulate my nervous system?
Yeah.
I need to get outside in the cold air or have a shower or go for a walk and, upregulate. So, thinking about our nervous system and our experience in this way, we can sort of look at what gets me back into that homeostasis so that I am calm enough but alert enough to be able to contact my own needs. Because as you and I were talking about on our walk this week, when you're really in a reactive state and you're really stuck in your head and you've got tunnel vision, you're not really connected to your deeper feelings and needs when you're in that reactive state. There's such a need to regulate and to calm the farm so that we can get more in touch with our needs as well as with other people's needs. So I'm really glad you said that. Now I'm looking at some of the comments, and I love that Mia said she thinks being a highly sensitive person is really her superpower now, and as a result she's found others who are part of her tribe, and it's wonderful not to be alone anymore as a highly sensitive person. And I'm so glad you shared that, Mia, because it made me think of people I've worked with over the years who have the opposite problem in a way, something called alexithymia, which is an interesting term in itself, which means difficulty recognizing and feeling your feelings. And I tell you, if you had to choose between being highly sensitive to your feelings and not being able to access them very easily at all, personally, I'd choose to be sensitive because it's very difficult to be someone who really struggles to access feelings. Yes. So that's a point I wanted to make.
Yeah, and we often talk in NBC about how feelings are essential to contacting needs. And yeah, I'm sure I've said it before, but I'm really surprised at how stubborn that disconnection can be, if there's a history of trauma, particularly. It's almost like just a wall.
It is.
So gently contacting the body seems to be a simple way to access emotion.
And isn't dissociation interesting? Because trauma can cause this sort of dissociated state, and yet it's just below the surface because it doesn't take much, just someone having a disagreement. Stephanie mentioned people having disagreements, conflict or a startling loud noise. And the person who was a moment ago feeling numb and dissociated is now feeling, on fire with feelings. So dissociation is to me, I'm still trying to kind of get a read on the experience of dissociation, because it's not nothing. It's not emptiness. It is a detachment from our feelings, but it can change in a moment and then change back again. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Well, I've often seen that. That's so interesting. Maybe we could talk about this on a walk, but I've often seen, yes, that dissociation and almost a breakthrough of feeling, but very difficult to recognize it. So I might say, well, what just happened there? And there's obviously something coming through, but even then, just not ready. Can't go there. Not willing. Oh, difficult, tricky.
Yes.
So yes, I agree. I'd rather be sensitive than not.
I'm totally shut down. And a few people are saying, like Steph and Lisa and Mia, that, they are highly sensitive people. And it's not surprising that groups like ours tend to attract more highly sensitive people, because it's the highly sensitive people in the world who kind of maybe also struggle to know what to do with this degree of sensitivity. And hopefully through practices like ours and groups like ours, find some support and strategies to do that.
Constructively, definitely. We've got some really helpful lists, which I'm sure many of us can relate to. Catherine says that noise, if it's competing with conversation, she has a sensitivity to. Yeah, I can relate to that too, Catherine. It's and worth, if you really honour conversation, worth responding to, right? I mean, that's the beauty of NVC too. It gives us skills to be creative about how we manage things. I relate to that one, definitely. And Stephanie says, oh, she's also said loud noises. Yeah, and crowds. I'm sure that's a common one. Mia says, in
Yeah.
terms of stimuli, I'm very sensitive to light, sound, and touch. Yeah. Yeah, bright lights. Stephanie agrees. Yeah.
Yeah. And let's differentiate too between the sensitivity of overwhelm. So when we can talk, sometimes we can talk about being sensitive to these things and they trigger a state of overwhelm, as opposed to a different use of our sensitivities, which is, when we talk about it as strengths. We're picking up on a lot of cues from other people. That is what makes us more empathic or more attuned,
Mm,
or, maybe
mm,
more compassionate sometimes, or more appreciative of beauty or excellence
mm,
or aesthetics, or, like this kind of sensitivity
mm.
that doesn't produce overwhelm, but that produces
Refinement.
yes, and
Mm,
joy and
mm,
appreciation. And so I'd love people to also add the way in which they're sensitive in a good way, like, when your sensitivity comes through to your
mm,
advantage. Does it spark joy, as
mm,
Marie Kondo would say? Does it help you feel connected? Does it
mm,
um, help you admire and appreciate the natural world or other
mm,
people's
mm,
creations, or
mm,
your
mm,
animals, or something else? What is
mm,
it for you, do you think, Alexis, that you're
mm,
really sensitive to in this beautiful way?
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. I think I'm actually quite sensitive to imagery. So, like you, I get really affected by even violent stories. I find it quite hard to detach from, and yet I think in a way it allows strong imaginations. So, for example, at our last NVC meeting, there was just a rush of imagery coming through. And I find within the body, a lot of my clients ask, a client today said, can you, Lexi, could you just give me some symbols or some images to work with? So we worked with a fan in the back of the body and then a zip. And yeah, so I think that I think the sensitivity to imagery helps my imagination, and then I feel like I can use that constructively for either a framework or sense of direction or a vision, or yeah, or even just really being in touch with intuition. Um,
Yes.
yeah, thanks for that question, Rachel. That was
Yeah.
really helpful. And we've got some
Yes.
good ones. Yes, animals. Steph says that's a really good point. The sensitivity to the animals, they're at next level, right? And they become her fur babies.
Yes. And Catherine says for her, it creates good attunement, the sensitivity that she possesses, and connection. For me, she doesn't get the images. It's more visceral, more in the
Mm.
body. Um,
Mm. Yeah, I'd agree with that, Catherine. The attunement, they're almost synonymous, aren't they?
mm,
And a felt sense. Yes, the ability to embody something rather than it just being outside. Oh, and Mia says that's the other end of the scale. I get to feel a deep sense of love, joy, and gratitude when I tune into it. This can be a person I value and deeply care about. It can be dance, music, art, or literature. And
yeah.
Catherine, you're doing great at the chat. Just keep going. Oh, nature. Yes, Mia. Yeah, and nature is so gentle. It helps us attune to the gentler, kinder, even aspects of life. Yeah, I think I can say kinder because sometimes the more gruff, crass, harsh realities, might impinge, whereas sensitivity, I agree, Mia, does attune us to nature. And nature documentaries are too
Oh,
violent. Oh, Shell.
If you haven't seen March of the Penguins, my favorite nature documentary of all time is March of the Penguins. It's
Okay.
so touching and beautiful.
Okay.
And at this time of year, just after the winter solstice, I think of the penguins quite often at this time of year, huddled in the dark in Antarctica, because I saw that documentary. I just want to read a beautiful quote, favorite quote of mine about music, because for me, my sensitivity is very much around music.
Gorgeous.
It
Please
really
do.
it
That would be
moves.
a perfect
Music
closing.
moves. It
Oh,
moves me in a way that words can't, and words are my living. So that's saying something. The quote is, music is a means of giving form to our feelings without attaching them to any events or objects in the
huh.
world.
It gives form to our feelings without attaching them to any events. Tell
Or
me more
object.
about that, Rachel. Why does that resonate for you?
Well, I guess music it's all about feelings, isn't it? It's the language of feelings, whether it's instrumental or there's words. You don't, if it's got words, you don't know what the singer's singing about necessarily. You and I love people like Tori Amos and Kate Bush, and you can't always access the meaning of the lyrics, but it doesn't matter because you make your own meaning, and it
Mm,
evokes imagery or nonverbal experience or very visceral experience in a way, to me, in a way that nothing else can. So for me, my sensitivity, that's a good sensitivity, is really music more than anything else.
mm. And it's not attached to an event. Was that the quote,
That's
Rachel?
the quote, not attached to any objects or events.
So
Of course,
we
it
can
can
then, yeah, we can
remind.
attach anything that's coming up.
That's right. Yeah,
Yeah.
we make our own meaning.
Mm,
Yeah.
mm.
And the feelings that come up are so, that's why, if you've ever seen a movie without music, it loses a lot of its emotional impact without the music.
Oh, yes, yes, yes. Soundtracks are really moving. They basically tell us what we're about to feel.
That's right. They do. So it's good that we're sensitive. We would not want to do away with our sensitivities. We just need to learn to be very gentle and discerning with our sensitivities. And I've just posted a short time ago in the chat the questionnaire from Elaine Aron, the psychologist who studied highly sensitive persons. And I think it's good to go through it and know what your sensitivities are, because in a way that's knowing your vulnerabilities, it's knowing your triggers. And once you know what they are, then you can be discerning, you can be mindful about how, you curate your world
Mm.
to look after yourself.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. I'm ready to leave it there, Rachel. How about you?
Yeah, I'd just like to remind everybody that the last Sunday of this month, there will be a practice group in your neighborhood.
Yeah, that's right. Here at the Graceful Bowls Club. So please mark it in your diary. It's set in stone. It's the last Sunday of every month from 9:30. So you just get that little bit of a sleep in, show on up just for a couple of hours. Well, how would you describe what needs does it meet for you, Rachel, our community event, a monthly
I
practice?
think the two top needs that it meets for me when I come to practice group is community,
Mm.
and which is similar to connection, and contribution.
Mm.
I just so enjoy sharing.
Mm.
What about you?
I am even starting to get a very deep sense of intimacy
Yeah.
in those sessions,
Yes.
really deep and in a very universal way. Um, and
Beautiful.
it's very nourishing. It's become like sustenance, soul sustenance. Mm.
And at our groups, you're allowed to open up and become sensitive and vulnerable to your own sensitivities. It's a safe space for doing that, right?
Yes, yes, and we do.
We do.
Yes, one of the lovely women who attended said to me, what is it about those? What is it about those dyads? I just cry every time and I never cry. It's like, great, that's great. Keep on coming.
Crying is good. You got to cry. I always say that to my clients.
Yes, yes. And there's some wonderful quotes from Paul about music. He says, thank you for the quote, Rachel. And And then Catherine is talking about contribution. That's a need that she shares. And then finally, Mia says, can I point out it's incredibly brave to lean into sensitivity, to
Mm.
work out what triggers the sensitivities. Yes, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Before it
Yeah, I
gets too
think
much.
that's a really good point. So I think it'll be useful for people to go and fill out that checklist that I've shared there. Wonderful participation. Thank you, everybody, for your
Mm.
sharing and comments.
We'll
Thank you,
see you
Alex.
same time, same place, everybody. Have a wonderful week.
Yes,
And
indeed.
thank you for your time, Rachel. We'll see you next time.
Thank you. See you then.
Okay, ciao.
Bye.